Hello, you are listening to the Wellness Project with Des. I'm your host, Desiree, a mental health therapist and holistic wellness coach. On my podcast, I interview experts in the field of mental health and wellness, as well as those who share their firsthand accounts of their mental health journeys. These interviews will give you many tips, tools, and strategies to improve your mental health, as well as give you hope, support, encouragement, and inspiration on your own personal mental health and wellness journey. Thanks so much for being here. I would greatly appreciate it if you took a moment to leave me a review on iTunes and leave the podcast 5 stars on Spotify. It really helps the podcast to grow, which in turn helps me to keep bringing on amazing guests and spreading mental health and wellness education and support. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey towards holistic well-being, unlocking the full potential of your mind, body, and spirit? If so, I'm thrilled to invite you to my program, the Holistic Wellness Transformation Coaching Program. My one-to-one coaching program is a comprehensive and individualized approach to help you improve your overall well-being. As a holistic wellness coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey to attain balance and harmony in all areas of your life. With personalized coaching sessions, I'll offer guidance and support throughout your wellness journey. Starting with a thorough holistic assessment. We'll dive into your past, habits, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and patterns that may be holding you back and no longer serving you. This assessment forms the foundation for your customized wellness plan. Together, we'll explore the 8 foundational elements of wellness to ensure you feel balanced and aligned with your goals and your values. This program goes beyond the surface, providing you with mental and emotional support. I will help you to manage stress, anxiety, and other challenges such as perfectionism and people-pleasing, offering techniques and strategies to enhance your resilience and your skills. The benefits of this program cannot be overstated. I'll be there every step of the way to support you in achieving balance and harmony in your life, manage stress, and improve your emotional well-being. Nurture healthy connections, create lasting, healthy habits, achieve your goals, and gain confidence in your ability to transform your life. Join me on this journey to holistic wellness. You could go to my website to check out my various packages, and you could go to my Calendly link found in the show notes to schedule a free 30-minute consultation call where we will go over the 8 core areas of wellness, as well as your goals and your dream life. Reach out and let's get started on your wellness journey so you can finally live the life you want. Hey there, I'm your host Des, and you are listening to episode number 174 of the Wellness Project with Des. And on today's episode, I am speaking with Daniel Gospodarek, and Daniel is here to talk with us all about a near-death experience that he had when he was 17 years old. He was in a really bad car accident, had to be put in a medically induced coma. He did suffer from a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and his road to recovery was long, took a toll on not only his physical health, but his emotional and mental health as well. Daniel is here with us today to talk about how this accident impacted his life, physically, emotionally, but also how it led him to the field of social work. Daniel's story is so inspiring and is really a testament of our will to live and not only survive, but thrive. The accident occurred the summer right before Daniel's senior year of high school, and his doctors told him that it was likely he was not going to graduate with his class and maybe not go to college on time, but Daniel was determined to prove them wrong and succeed in his goals despite nearly losing his life and suffering with this TBI. I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. It's so inspirational, and I'm so glad that Daniel is here with us today to share his inspiring story. Help me welcome Daniel. Hey everyone, I'm here with Daniel Gospodarek. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So everyone, we are going to be talking about Daniel's journey. He had experienced a TBI. So We're going to be talking about that, which is not something we've talked about on the podcast before. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about TBIs and your experience and how this impacted your journey, your life, your mental health. So I would love if to get us started, you could introduce yourself and share your story with us.
Yeah, for sure. So, as mentioned, my name is Daniel, currently a social worker, LCSW in Denver, Colorado, but soon to be moving to back to Wisconsin. But the purpose of the interview is to talk a little bit about my traumatic brain injury, TBI for short. Actually happened in Wisconsin from an auto accident. I was in a vehicle passenger. It was just a one car rollover, but we rolled four times. And in the process of rolling, I went unconscious, so I don't remember anything. And then I woke up 3 days later in from a medically induced coma. So, but during that time, there was a lot of sirens, there was jaws of life, like removing car parts and stuff, and then also having to have brain surgery, which was, something I wasn't planning on doing as a 17-year-old. Fast forward, come to, they had to take part of my skull off to stop a brain bleed. Because of the brain bleed, there was a stroke in my left prefrontal cortex, and then fractured my skull, and then some more like the medical pieces, collapsed lung, and then I damaged like the left side of my hearing, and then some double vision in my eyes. Those are pieces that are not directly related to the TBI, but happened inside the whole accident as well. Yeah, from there, it was kind of like this long, long journey. So 10 days in the ICU, 7 days inpatient rehab, and then after that, it was 3 months outpatient physical therapy and then 17 months speech therapy.
Yeah, wow. So you were really young when this happened. What grade were you in at 17? Were you 11th or 12th grade?
I was going into my 12th. I was going into my senior year. So that's the way to kick it off, right? Barriers are just challenges in the overall recovery process. Was one of the doctors while I was in the ICU was like, you're probably not going to graduate with the cohort that you started with. And I think like this is the beautiful part about like, having lived experience and then bringing that into the therapy room and other therapists doing that. And you don't have to have lived experience, but like there are all these little moments where we can start to like build resilience. And it doesn't have to be like when you're in an ICU bed, it can be anywhere, right? But you can just say no. And I told the doctor, I was like, no, I'll graduate. And I did. And
Wow.
it was interesting because like then you're like, well, it's kind of like you put that out there and it's like, well, how do I make this happen? Right. It's not like it's how do you do something, right? It's like that's the question, because sometimes it's like it can't be done, right? But it's like, well, if we rephrase that question and say, if we could just imagine, how would we do this, right? What would it look like? Getting creative. And luckily, I passed most, I think, all my classes up to that point, and I could do just half days for the first semester. And then I would go home and pass out because fatigue, as we'll get into, like symptoms of TBI, is huge. So I would sleep like 2 or 3 hours in the day, and then I'd pass out for like another 12 or 13 hours at night. And then second semester, I could go one full day and then a half day, but I was still taking that nap even then. So going through any part of the recovery process, right? TBI, mental health, mental illness, even medical stuff, right? Recovering from chemo treatments, there are these humbling moments where you're like, wow, a 17-year-old that needs to sleep 17, 16, 15 hours. And you're like, what's going on in my life? Life has an interesting way of sending you those messages.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going from being a typical teenager to the next day, just your
Hmm.
life
Oh,
completely
yeah.
turned upside down and different. And I have so many questions, but
Yeah. Let
when
them
you,
rip.
yeah, I don't even know where to start. But I have so many things going on in my mind, but I guess I'll just start with when you initially woke up from
Mhm.
that medically induced coma. I mean, how did you even take all of that in? I can't imagine how incredibly shocking and traumatic that could be.
I don't understand this process because I think the human brain is so complex that we don't even know everything that it does and can do. But so I thought I had gone through, and mind you, I'm on like a crap ton of pain meds, right? Like all these meds are flowing through my system. I thought I had gone through I crossed like a time barrier and I was in France when I came to. I was like, am I in France? Like, was my first cognitive thought, right? That I remember having. But even before that, My mom told me that I asked how the other person was in the accident, but I don't coherently remember that. So it's wild how the brain works, right? And then you're so kind of hyped up on pain meds that like some of this stuff like doesn't really register. And I was in a medically induced coma for 3 days. For like the next, I think it was like 2 to 4 days, they would put me in a coma at night so I could rest. And then they would wean me off during the day. So I could come to, they could see how some of my cognitive skills, right? Eye contact, stuff like that was working. And then from there, just kind of slowly progress to not have the induced coma in the evenings or the night times. So the first three stages were kind of a question mark. The big question mark was after the brain surgery, the surgeon was to my family was like, we don't know if he's gonna make it through the night. Time will tell at this point, right? So being that it was a TBI, they also didn't allow my family to touch me at all. So there was no like stimulation whatsoever. Just whatever was on me in terms of like a gown, right? Whatever was on me in terms of like medical equipment, breathing stuff, whatever it was, right?
Okay, interesting. I haven't heard of that. Is that typical with TBIs?
That I'm not sure. I can understand the overstimulation piece. If somebody is like, holding your hand and like constantly like rubbing or something like that, they were like, hey, his body, his brain needs to just focus on healing right now. Can't be paying attention to other stuff. Not that affection isn't important, right? Like attachment, attunement, all those things are very important in life. But at that moment, it was just like his body needs to start rebuilding quickly.
Mm-hmm. No, that
So,
makes sense. That makes sense.
mhm.
And so that initial recovery, how was your mental state during that time?
Well, I will say that the meds helped. I had a very low sense of humor and I would laugh inappropriately at stuff. That helped, I will say. And I mean, I don't think it's intentional that the meds do that, but I think, it lightened the load a little bit, right? And at the same time, it was kind of like, hearing some of those comments of like, okay, like you're not going to graduate. My first walk in the ICU was so being a 17-year-old independent, fit adult or fit like 17-year-old, right? To having this accident and then having to walk while holding onto a wheelchair and then surrounded by three nurses with a gait belt, right? Like you're talking huge identity shifts in level of independence, just confidence, self-esteem, right? Just all these different components began to shift. I think in the long run, it was for the better. It led me to social work, which was cool. But at the same time, in the moment, you sometimes don't realize it when you're in the thick of whatever trauma, whatever hell you're going through.
And that must be so hard too, because that incident, that accident directly conflicts with the stage in life that you're at. I mean, teenagers are building their independence, and here you are
Mm-hmm.
dependent on people to walk and to help you with
Yeah.
all these things and this is the time that you're gearing up to go out and be independent and live life on your own.
Like you said, it's a conflict. It's like a tectonic plate shifting. Then to piggyback off the walking, like 17-year-old, like I couldn't take a shower without having like a nurse like be there in case I started to fall. And you're just like, whoa, other end of the caregiving spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. That must have been incredibly difficult. So, what month did this happen in? Because I'm just
So
wondering going into your
yeah,
senior year.
it was the 15-year anniversary was on the 7th of July.
Wow. So, right before school starts.
Yeah, like I got home late July. My high school senior year started like the 28th, I want to say, or so, around there of August. There was no time to waste, that's for sure. We did physical therapy, I think right at the bat, 3 times a week. Speech therapy was 3 times a week. It was a lot on top of school. So, going to school and then having to get in the car, go right up to speech therapy. A lot of time on the highway.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too, because this was such a bad car accident, did you have any sort of traumatic reaction to being in cars?
Yes, I will say yes. Like it wasn't PTSD or anything like that, but it was definitely a trauma response. And I think this also speaks to like therapists, LCSWs, LPCs, psychologists, doctors are great, but I think this also speaks to the other like more therapeutic activities. I was working with a rec therapist. The hospital, when I was inpatient, had like a valet parking, and she took me out to just sit on the bench where the cars were slowly coming, and I could feel like my whole left side, or I think it was my left side, like just like trembling as these cars would come through. And even though they were going like 2 miles an hour, right? Hearing the motor running, and then also feeling the sensations of like the vibrations of like the engine running. My nervous system was so hyper alert to that. I definitely did have that as form of a trauma response. It was really interesting too. So another was a more of a trauma response, but it was almost like a trauma bond. Was the only other person outside of my family I trusted to drive me was the person that I got into the accident with,
Really?
because he saved my life essentially by calling EMS, by calling his mom, who was a nurse, who told the EMS people not to take me to a lower trauma hospital because that could lead to like delays in care, just to take me right away to a higher acuity emergency room. So I knew he'd have my back if something happened, right?
Oh, wow. So did you
Yeah.
hold any sort of blame or anything towards him?
No, it was really like an accident. I dropped something and I couldn't find it. He reached down to pull a panel off underneath the radio, and that was the last thing I remember, is seeing like the blue, the red, and the yellow circuits, and then woke up and I thought I was in France. We started working out together, we started running together. He would drop me off at high school because they took my license, because they were like, well, TBI, maybe you'll have seizures, maybe you won't. We need to be safe.
Okay, so there's so much here. There's so much
Oh,
in this recovery. I mean, there's so many
mhm.
different layers to not only the symptoms, which I do want to ask you about as well, but just how it impacted your functioning, the trauma response to the cars and having to be in the cars a lot, going to different appointments. Before we get into some more, you mentioned it a little bit, but what are some of the symptoms that you were experiencing as a result of the TBI?
I'll start with like acute and then like more long term things that I struggled with. So, like acute was memory, attention, word finding, more like the executive function pieces, right? Planning, prioritizing stuff. And that's actually what a lot of speech therapy honed in on. It wasn't so much like speech, like talking. It was more speech of like, how do you cognitively shift from task to task to task while maintaining where you were in each of those tasks while you switch, right? So that you can jump in and go back, right? So that was probably the most acute thing that I had challenges with. Figuring out where I was. The fatigue was also probably right off the bat. I was in the inpatient and I just wanted to sleep all day, but like the nurses were like, no, you gotta go. Get up, go. That's the only way you're gonna work through this stuff. That was really rough. I would take a shower and I would have to take a nap afterwards. I was so tired. Going from, working out probably 1 to 3, 4 times a week to like having to take a nap after you shower. It's kind of like, what the hell is going on in my life? So the fatigue was really impactful. Some of the other challenges with the TBI did not start showing up until probably later, because like one, it was new. You're not really in a pattern or a routine. So like everything just feels like it's like, oh, is that normal? Is that not normal? Or one of the challenges I had from the TBI, when they had to cut my skull, they cut the muscles on the left side of my face. So everything pulled over to the right and everything was overcompensating. Speech therapy, actually, one of the first things they focused on in inpatient was getting the muscle fibers to reconnect. So they would actually like, I think it had like 2 to 4 like AA batteries in, and it had like a moist tip on it. And they would actually shock me in certain areas. They would shock me and I would blink my eye, but I wouldn't actually blink. Like it would just like fire the muscles and to like get those muscles back working, because everything was just pulled to the right. So I would do that 2, 3, 4 times a week. Settling in, right, was the restlessness. I did not have an issue with sleep until I had my second concussion. Mind you, like these aren't like, oh, I wasn't playing football. It was like I bumped my head on like a cupboard that I left open getting a plate. So like your head is so sensitive. So the racing thoughts started, the anxiety started of like, did I just give myself another TBI? Like, what is this going to do? Right. So then I actually started having challenges going to sleep. So there was a period of like 4 months where if I wanted to go to sleep by like 10, 10:30, I'd have to go to sleep by like 7:30 or 8, because I would just toss and turn in my own head. And then anger started coming, irritability started coming, like the rage of Hallmark kind of TBI stuff. And especially like directed at my parents and family, because they're the ones that are closest, right? I could like hold it together at school, but like when I was at home and I could let my guards down and actually relax, like it would start to come out. That's where also, mental health therapy can help.
Yeah, and I do want to ask, so what kind of supports were you receiving from your family? Did you go to mental health therapy? Like, how did that look for you, these different supports for your emotions
Mhm.
and your emotional healing?
At first, no, just because like I was so tired and I was like also that kind of Midwest like stubbornness of like I'll white knuckle this thing and everything's gonna be fine. And it was not fine for a period of time. So like that month of August before school started, I couldn't be left alone because of the seizure question mark and my needs, right? So my sister would be at home doing her college coursework that she was able to get modified to like remote and like be at home while my parents were at work. And it wasn't until what, that was 2009. So I want to say like probably 2012, I started going to counseling then to just have like an outlet for some of this like anger and like just like frustration that, all these things that are, I mean, at the time, like I didn't think were bothering me, but it was like, all your friends are going to bonfires and stuff and hanging out on the weekends, and I'm in bed by 7 because I can't lift my head off the pillow. I'm so tired, right? And then hearing, what people did over the weekend on Monday at school, and it's like, yeah, didn't do too much. So again, going through some of those identity shifts, grief and loss, all those different components. TBIs can be, they can range from mild concussions to severe TBIs where you have to have medical surgery interventions. It just depends on where they are on that spectrum.
So it sounds like your family was very supportive. What about your
Mhm.
friend network, your social network?
I mean, they were supportive. I think they were as supportive as they could be, right? I couldn't ask my friends to sacrifice their senior year, but like, would they text? Would they see how things were going? I remember it was New Year's Eve of that senior year, and one of my buddies, we just hung out and watched the ball drop on TV and drank chocolate milk. Like those things, like, they mean a lot. At the same time, you can't be like, friends, can you drop everything either? I mean, I guess you can ask, right? But then it's like they don't. It's like just something you have to kind of hold, and that's part of the grief and loss too, right?
Definitely. And during that time, getting all these different supports from your friends, from your family, what did you find to be the most helpful? And if anything, was there anything that was not helpful?
Space was probably one of the most helpful things because then I wouldn't have anyone to put my rage on. Working out was great. I needed to get back in as soon as I was cleared. I started. Overstimulation was a huge irritant for me. So my father was a farmer and he would do dishes at 4:30 in the morning. Again, kind of going back to like that hypersensitivity to cars, right? Like I was hypersensitive to noise and I would hear those dishes clanging on the other side of the house and I would get up and just be like, what the hell are you doing? I'm trying to sleep. Nothing changed with his pattern of doing life. It was all me. So that overstimulation or having too many things going on around me was very difficult, especially when like senior year, it would be like classroom time and there'd be like side discussions and like trying to also follow what the teacher was saying, trying to tune out some of those components, right? Especially because my double vision was a little bit more intense. My hearing was probably not at the point of where it is now, even though it's still not like I can definitely sleep on my other side and not hear things because it just tunes them out. So having that kind of hearing imbalance was kind of hard to like hone in on what certain things were happening.
And it does sound like you received a lot of accommodations from school, at least with your schedule. Were there any other accommodations?
Not that I can remember with the schoolwork, but yeah, I mean I would go to school from 8 to 10:15ish, maybe 10:20, and then come home for the first semester and then second semester, whole day, one day, and then half day. Every year you have kind of like, senior year orientation, junior year, sophomore year orientation. I mean, the principal was like, with your permission, we'll just say, hey, you all know this person. This person's gonna need space on those stairs, right? If things are too wild, like his balance is off. If you bump into him, he's gonna fall over, right? So please just give him space and stuff like that. I can't even think of one person that wasn't like open to that. That was really neat to be a part of, but it was also like I'm kind of like the center of attention and not the best way, and I'm like, I would rather not be here in this position.
It sounds great that you had so much support surrounding you, and I would imagine that that's a big part of your success today.
Yeah, I know it is a huge part, and it is a huge part in just anyone's kind of recovery journey. Who do you have to lean on in those tough times? Who can you call in those dark hours or in the middle of the night? And those people that they know there's something going on and they'll hold that space for a while.
So, so important. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think how I asked you, like, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, part of why I ask is because so many people don't know what to do in these situations when something
Mhm.
like this impacts a loved one. They don't know how to be there, they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. So, just, you mentioning a few things I think is helpful for people to know that even just being there, even just being a phone call away is so important to
Mhm.
know, is so helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Most people have some level of informal supports, right? Family, friends, people in religious or spiritual dynamics or, run clubs or something like that. But then there's also like on the other side, there's formal supports, right? And at least in Colorado, there's the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado. It's like a hub of information, right? Placements, if somebody needs a place to live, therapy resources, all these different types of connections, advocacy, right? I don't think everyone is aware of them, especially when you're in an emergency situation or just coming out of an emergency situation. But I think having more public awareness of those types of organizations that are there to support families is very crucial to the recovery process as well.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering too, being 15 years later, and this has
Mhm.
been, I'm assuming, a 15-year long journey, where are you at today? Are you receiving any sort of supports? Do you need any sort of accommodations at work? How is the TBI impacting you today?
Great question. So, the hearing loss, the double vision is still there. For the most part, a lot of the other challenges, anger, fatigue, irritability, attention, focus, have, knock on wood, dissipated. Not everyone has that with TBI. So I say that from a very humble perspective. Just general anxiety and stuff like that, like, still pushing forward. So in terms of accommodations, not a lot of things, able to drive, but I think that's where part of where I am today is also because of that TBI and kind of what led me to social work. That's what I got my undergrad in, and then you got my master's in social work. And one of the specialties inside my private practice is working with folks who have TBIs, and partially because A, I've been there, but B, it's also like, are there trauma components that we can help integrate and process through here? And or are there trauma components in the family system that need to be processed through with, most of the time there's a TBI, it's pretty close call with like life or death, depending on the severity. So are there trauma components in that system that need to be addressed, right? Or even just having general, consultation calls and saying, turning the lights on at a certain hour might not be a good idea, right? And we might need to be a little flexible here with the time we do the dishes in the morning, right? Like pulling in some of those pieces because sleep is so powerful in terms of healing, but it can also, like, if the nurses would have let me sleep through that 7 days I was in rehab, it might not have been the best for me.
Yeah, and I'm sure each person, and like you said, sounds like TBIs are kind of on a spectrum. So each person and what they need and their healing journey is so different. So that's great that part of your practice is focusing on people that have suffered TBIs. And I would love to hear how your TBI led you to social work.
I think it was somewhere inside that inpatient rehab where I was like probably gonna land somewhere in here. Don't know where that will be, but somewhere inside that helping profession. And I originally thought that was going to be physical therapy at first or something like that. And then my sister, who's also a social worker, was started talking to me about the degree. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? So got the undergrad in it. And I was like, well, I can't really do what I want to do without the master's. So that's what led me then to moving into the master's to be able to work in more of the hospital settings or in private practice or a little mixture of the both.
Okay, I love that. Two social
Hmm.
workers in the family. That's
Hmm.
great. So you get through your senior year, you do graduate with your class, and did you go right to college that next fall or did you take a
I
break?
I did, and it wasn't like a recommended accommodation. It was more so like something my parents had discussed and like my family had discussed was if you're gonna go right away, do not go live on the campus right away. So I commuted my first year, continued to like focus on sleep. I think some of those times, or maybe maybe at the beginning of that kind of rotation. You know what, it was probably at the end of my senior year, so not then, but like were some of those sleep challenges that I described where I couldn't fall asleep for a while. Just kind of continued to work on myself, would pack the gym bag out right before classes and then shower and go to class and then come home. If I needed to, I'd take a rest or a nap, do homework and stuff. But I also, being at home versus being on a college campus, there's a lot less stimulation, a lot less distractions. And I think that was probably one of the smartest like moves inside that recovery process, was to slow things down. Looking back at it, it was hard, like seeing friends and stuff and making friends at college that were living on campus and like, oh, can you come to this? Right. And then it's like, oh, I can't.
Yeah, definitely. And so when you started college, did you get any accommodations from the college at that point? Did you need them?
I did not, but I did take like, I think like most college students now probably take like a mixture of like 13 to 16 credit hours. I think maybe my first 2 years, I only took 12 credit semesters. Like it was just like 4 classes, that's it, no more, no less. And then it wasn't until I got into my bachelor program for social work where it was like, you got to take more. You have an internship that's 4, and you have 12, 13 credit classes. That's when it started bumping up. And I think like that's where some of that fatigue started to really fall off. And then I could really get my stride back with having a lot more of that endurance and kind of that stamina to keep going that kind of gets knocked out when that fatigue is there.
Okay, great. And so you go to college, you're meeting new people, making friends. Were you open about having a TBI?
To some people, it's like anything, any kind of part of your identity, right? It's like not everyone has to know. A lot of the people I worked out with, or like I had a few couple good gym friends that maybe we'd play like a pickup game of basketball, and it was very like, okay, like just don't swing your arms around me, right? But it also kind of felt unfair. Like, like those close people, I didn't openly go around sharing it. So
Okay. And I know this happened when you were young, 17, you're still developing your identity and your perspective on life. But did this TBI and just even maybe working with people with TBIs now, did this have any impact or change on your perspective of your life?
yeah, I mean, I think it gave me a huge, huge level of direction. Before the TBI, I was like, I'm either gonna go business or I'll join like the military. I didn't really have like a plan of anything. And then it was like, well, like maybe there is some like meaning or some direction you have to pull out of this. And I think that's where it kind of intertwined with, I'll probably land somewhere in this field in that inpatient rehab. And then that conversation with my sister, right? But I think the recovery process alone just kind of goes to show the testament of the human will when it's under stress and how powerful it can be, and the grit that most of us humans have at some level. It just needs to be kind of like scraped through to get to.
Yeah, and I mean, you got through that, and I would imagine it would give you some confidence that you could get through anything. I mean, you went through one of the hardest things that someone can go through.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you just like any human, there's still self-doubt, right? Like trying to build a private practice and you're like, is my SEO gonna work this month or not?
So
So
true.
I think there's always times where you kind of like question aspects to it. At the end of the day, there's like this innate sense of like, come what may, right? But that doesn't mean like you're invincible. I feel like before that accident, I felt much more of like, come what may, I can take whatever life has to throw at me, as like, one of those defiant teenagers. And then it's kind of like, no, like this life will humble you very quickly.
Daniel, this has been so great. Do you have any parting words of advice or wisdom for those that have either experienced a near-death experience or a TBI?
I think in those dark moments, I don't mean that in like a religious or spiritual sense, but just like when we're really tested, kind of going back to that grit, right? Like that's where we find some of those pillars of strength or pillars of our character that we can really lean on if we allow ourselves to access those components.
I love that. So true. So great to keep in mind. And Daniel, I would love if you could share where everyone can find you if you want to share your practice or social media.
My Instagram is at revitalize mental underscore health. I'm on LinkedIn, TikTok. Facebook, and then my business is revitalizementalhealth.com. So you can look us up. We're based out of Kenosha, Wisconsin right now because we're moving.
All right, great. And everyone, I will have all of those links in the show notes. Daniel, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the time too.
I really hope that you liked this episode and gained a lot of value from it. If you did like this episode, please share it on social media. You can tag me at The Wellness Project with Des on Instagram and at According to Des on Facebook. If you do enjoy my podcast and gain value from it, I would greatly appreciate your support. You can show your love and support by buying me a coffee. This will help my podcast to grow and in turn will help me to keep bringing on amazing guests. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/The Wellness Project with Des to show your support. All books written by or recommended by my amazing podcast guests are listed on my Amazon storefront. Go to the link in the show notes to check out those books. I would love to extend an invite to you to become a part of my community. You can do this through Facebook, where we will be discussing this episode. I would love for you to share your insights, any aha moments, any thoughts or ideas you would like to contribute. You can contribute in the discussion taking place in my Facebook group, and it's a great place to connect with me because I am in there every day with mental health and wellness content, discussions, reflections, journal prompts. It's a fun and supportive place to be. You can find the group at facebook.com/groups/According to Des, and that link will also be in the show notes. You can also check out more of what I'm doing on my website, accordingtodes.com. You'll find a lot of wellness blogs, written interviews, detailed podcast show notes, and my shop, where you will be able to find workshops, my self-care course, digital downloads, ebooks. There's a lot going on my website, so make sure you check that out at accordingtodes.com. And while you're there, join my email list to stay in the know about what I have going on and available for you. When you sign up, you will get your free ebook, The 5 Stress Reduction Techniques to help you feel more relaxed. Thank you so much for being here. I will talk to you next week. So until then, I hope you have a calm and peaceful week.